Hello students of Debate Kansas City, Gabe Cook here, and we're going to be continuing our series, The Speeches of Policy Debate. Today we're going to dive into what I consider the most difficult constructive speech in a policy debate round, the second negative constructive, or the 2NC. But before we jump into my tips on how to prepare and deliver an effective 2NC, I want to talk about a concept known as preparation time. You see, both teams in a policy debate round get 5 to 10 minutes of total preparation time, and that's time that you get to use as a team in between speeches. So let's say that the affirmative team has just spoken and you have to give the second negative constructive. You might use a minute or two of prep time to get your evidence in order and to write out the arguments you want to make. You can write out the arguments before the speech, and so you have notes to deliver your speech from, and that can be quite handy. I would recommend that you try and save as much preparation time as you can for the last speech of the debate round, because that is your final opportunity to make a clear case to the judge why you deserve to win. So you have 5 to 10 minutes of total preparation time. You get to use it as you please, and it's handy to use preparation time to write down notes, get your speech organized, and gather evidence. Alright, preparation time out of the way. Now let's dive into our topic for today's policy debate speech series, the second negative constructive. Now, like always, I'm going to give you 5 tips for how to deliver an effective second negative constructive. Let's go ahead and check out tip number 1. Learn a generic. What do I mean by that, learn a generic? Well, I mean that you need to learn an argument that can apply to a number of different affirmative cases. We call it a generic position. Alright, so what you want to do is maybe find an argument like, say, the economy disadvantage, and say, you know what, I think I can argue that most cases are going to hurt the economy somehow. So I take my economy disadvantage, I highlight the evidence, I find evidence that anytime I'm running this economy disadvantage, I want to be reading it in order to extend and better explain the economy disadvantage. And you also do something known as writing out an overview. All right, the first negative constructive is going to read the shell of your argument. It's going to lay it out there sort of bare bones. Here are the 3 pieces of our disadvantage. Your overview describes the pieces that you laid out in more of a story format to give the judge a very crisp and clear understanding of your argument. After you read your overview, you go in and you extend and explain your argument, which we'll get into in a latter step. But before the tournament starts, you can check out tip number 1, which is to prepare a generic argument. And the reason you do this, the biggest, most important reason you do this, is because the affirmative has their case, which means they have a bit of a comfort zone. They run this case every debate round. You want to find something on the negative that you're comfortable with, that you could read just about every debate round as long as it applies to the other team's position. Alright, so step 1 was learn a generic. Now let's take a look at step number 2. Flow the 2AC. This is very important. Alright, the way your round would have gone is something like this. The affirmative team got up there, they read their case. Then the first negative stood up, made a bunch of core arguments. Alright, the second affirmative constructive then gets up and responds to all the negative attacks. You want to write that down. You've got to know everything the affirmative said. That way you can respond to it. Because if the second affirmative speaker makes some arguments and you don't catch them and your partner doesn't catch them, I guarantee that in the next affirmative speech they're going to bring that up and use it against you. So flow what your opponent said to help prepare your responses. Now that's going to bring us to step number 3. Divide the block. What do I mean by that? What is the block? Alright, here's the deal. The second affirmative constructive speaker goes. After that, we have the second negative speech, and then we're going to have the first negative rebuttal. There'll be a cross-X sandwiched in between them, but there's no affirmative speech. So you have back-to-back negative speeches. We call it the block. It can be anywhere from 8 to 13 minutes of time where you as the negative get to make your case as to why we don't want to vote affirmative. So, what do I mean by divide the block? Alright, well, I've got a visual aid to help me out. We'll see how it goes. Let's say that the first negative speaker made these 4 arguments. They had an economy disadvantage, they argued against the solution, they argued against the cause, they argued against the problem. Now, each one of these positions can be developed more. If I made 3 arguments against the problem, I've got to go check out what the second affirmative constructive said against those arguments, and I've got to rebut them. All right? And I've got to make my case for why my responses to the problem should hold up. Now, it wouldn't make a lot of sense if both people talked about the cause and both people talked about the problem. Who's going to talk about the economy disadvantage? Who's going to talk about the solution? So what you do is, before the second negative speech, you figure out who's going to take what and when. All right, so the second negative speaker might say, you know what, I'm going to take the economy disadvantage and I'm going to take the solution arguments in my speech. And then first negative rebuttalist in your speech, take the cause and take the problem. The important thing is that you divide it up so that you know who's taking what, and so you cover all the arguments that were made in the first negative constructive. And I also have these represented here as though they're on their own sheet of paper. That's important. When you flow in the debate round, you want to give your responses to the solution, your economy disadvantage, your answers to the problem, and your answers to the cause their own sheet of paper. All right, there's going to be a lot of arguments that happen on these sheets of paper. So, divide the block, figure out who's taking what. That brings us to step number 4. Extend and explain. Like I said, the first negative speaker reads the shell of an argument, or just a couple arguments, like they have a couple reasons why the affirmative case isn't going to solve. What you do in the second negative constructive is you take those arguments you made in the first negative, or the arguments that your partner made in the first negative, and you blow them up. You make them bigger. You argue against everything the second affirmative constructive said to your attacks, and you explain why their arguments are wrong, and then you read new evidence to rebuild your arguments. So if I read the economy disadvantage in the second negative constructive, the way I would extend explain is I would start with an overview, then I would answer all of the arguments the second affirmative constructive made against my position, and while I do that, I'm going to read extra evidence and try to tell more of a story with the argument. And I might read new link evidence, I might read new impact evidence, so that at the end of my speech the judge says, wow, that economy disadvantage is really good. It looks like the negative has overwhelmed what the affirmative said. So you extend and explain. Alright, that brings us to step number 5. Compare and contrast. What you need to start doing in the first negative is lay the groundwork for why you win the debate round. What you want to do is take the position of the affirmative, the benefits that they claim are going to come from voting affirmative, and compare them to the benefits that you argue will come from voting negative. Maybe the affirmative case says, you know what, we're going to stop global warming and we're going to help the environment. And you've read your economy disadvantage. And you say, you know what, when the economy goes down, we have less money to spend on environmental programs. So the net effect of the affirmative case, it might seem like it's going to fix the economy, but in reality, because of our economy disadvantage, we flip that back on them and show that not only are they going to hurt the economy, which causes extreme poverty, it can cause different types of oppression, it's also going to hurt the environment over the long term. So you want to vote negative because we prevent economic destruction, which will in turn cause economic collapse. So the affirmative doesn't get their benefits, they just get disadvantages. Alright, so those were the 5 steps in how to give a second negative constructive. You want to learn a generic position before the tournament. You've got to flow what the second affirmative constructive says. You divide up the block, you extend and explain your arguments, and you compare and you contrast. Hope this was helpful. Gabe Cook with Debate Kansas City. Take care.